The Russian telegram channel VCHK-OGPU, which is associated with the Russian Special Services, published an interesting post about the situation in the occupied Donbass. According to it, a closed social survey was conducted in the region, the results of which greatly alarmed Moscow. According to the resource, the survey showed a high risk of a social explosion in the occupied territory. Residents are driven to despair due to the lack of water. The results of the survey are such that a social explosion could occur in the region at any moment. The index of satisfaction of the population with the water supply is 21 percentage points. The number of those who are rather satisfied with what is happening has fallen from 57% in December 2023 to 35% in April 2025, the Russian channel writes. The most difficult situation for the occupiers is observed in Shakhtarsk district, Mariupol, Debaltseve, Snizhny, Torez, and Kiev. There, the satisfaction index varies from 10 to 27 percentage points. The telegram channel called what was happening an environmental disaster. At the same time, it is claimed that against the backdrop of the crisis, there are companies operating in the region that are connected to local authorities and are making money from selling drinking water. Moscow likes to blame Ukraine for the water crisis that has broken out in the occupied Donbass. In fact, the catastrophe that has occurred is the work of Russia itself, which destroyed the region's water supply system during a full-scale invasion. The occupiers apparently have no intention of solving the problem. All across the Russian-occupied Ukrainian land, Moscow is struggling to provide one of the most basic needs of the very people it claims to have liberated: water. Years of neglect and war damage have left Russian-occupied areas of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts with barely functioning infrastructure, while in the more recently occupied areas of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia oblasts, the destruction of the Kahovka Dam by Russian forces in June 2023 has left reservoirs nearly empty. In the occupied Crimean Peninsula, partially fed by those same reservoirs, water shortages are looming after a second year of drought. It seems that people are deliberately being kept in a state of survival, so that they are busy queuing for water and not thinking about politics, resistance, or protests. A yellow ribbon activist living in the occupied territories told.
There is an ongoing fuel shortage at gas stations in Russia. In many parts of the country, people have to wait in line for hours to get fuel. This is causing serious discontent among drivers. As seen in new footage shared on Telegram channels, hundreds of cars are lining up in various cities, waiting for fuel deliveries. Although local authorities claim there is no reason for panic, statements from drivers indicate otherwise. It should be noted that the fuel shortage, which has been ongoing for several days in Russia and Crimea, is due to drone strikes by the Ukrainian army on oil refineries across the country. In some cases, the strikes have forced refineries to halt operations, significantly affecting the volume of fuel available for sale.
Russia's plans indicate their final transition to the principles of using assault groups as the basis for warfare. This was stated by Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council. According to the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council, the Russians are trying to increase recruitment for contracts, including luring conscripts and foreigners. In addition, the Russian army is relying more on motorcycles, buggies, and other vehicles instead of armored vehicles. They are doing all this because in kill zones, armor and people are quickly destroyed by drones, and the only way to pass a zone of 5 to 15 kilometers is on such transport. But there are enough drones now to burn such scooter riders. However, similar plans, which Belousov announces in the Russian Federation, indicate the final transition of the Russians to the principles of using assault groups as the basis for war. The Post says, according to Andriy Kovalenko, this is not critical. Enemy assault groups are operating in the east. They are being destroyed. On the contrary, the Russians are striving to reduce their losses. In general, the mass use of drones, especially those with artificial intelligence, will finally change the role of infantry in war. It seems that this will happen next year, Kovalenko added. He noted that all actions of the Russians indicate that they do not plan to end the war. The West, I hope, understands this, and they plan to wage war not only against us, summarized the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council. According to the analysis, while Russia can replenish its troop numbers through aggressive recruitment, its defensive industry cannot produce new tanks and fighting vehicles fast enough to replace staggering battlefield losses, which have exceeded 20,000 units. Having already depleted its best Soviet-era stockpiles, the Russian army is now resorting to meet assaults with unarmored civilian vehicles, a desperate tactic that highlights a fatal flaw in its war-fighting capability and signals a coming crisis. There are still many older Russian vehicles left in some storage yards, but many of these are even older than those that have been mobilized. Satellite analysis shows that some, if not most, of what remains in these Russian storage yards are armored vehicles that have not moved in years. At current costs, refurbishing them is not financially feasible. They are little more than scrap metal.